Have you ever believed that a single moment could change an entire life? A decision? A fleeting encounter? Or even a flower? Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. New York, 10 p.m. The city never sleeps, but on rainy nights, something about it feels different. Colder, darker. A narrow street in Midtown, lined with upscale restaurants and towering skyscrapers, houses a small flower stall tucked beneath a modest awning. This is not a luxurious boutique filled with dazzling lights. It is simply an old wooden cart covered with a worn-out silver tarp. The flowers are neatly wrapped in paper, but the relentless wind and rain have begun to wilt them. Lily Evans, a young woman in her mid-20s, stands behind the cart, struggling to gather the flowers that have been caught by the wind. She wears a cream-colored wool coat, slightly faded from years of use. Her long chestnut hair is loosely tied back, with a few strands curling against her pale cheeks, chilled by the cold air. A sudden gust of wind nearly knocks her off balance. A red rose slips from the cart and tumbles onto the wet pavement. Lily instinctively rushes forward to retrieve it, but just then, a screeching sound pierces the night. Tires skid violently against the slick asphalt. A black Lamborghini comes to an abrupt halt, mere inches away from the flower stall. Rainwater splashes across the sidewalk, reflecting the neon lights of the towering buildings. Lily freezes. Her heart pounds in her chest, her legs weak beneath her. For a split second, she wonders if she has just escaped a terrible accident. The car door swings open. The steady, deliberate sound of leather shoes stepping onto wet pavement echoes through the street. A man steps out. He is tall, around 6'1", dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Under the dim glow of the streetlights, his features seem sculpted from stone. A sharp jawline, a straight nose, and strikingly cold blue eyes. His dark hair is slicked back, yet a few strands have fallen forward due to the misty rain. Raindrops fall onto his broad shoulders, but he appears entirely unaffected. His gaze sweeps over Lily, unhurried, unreadable. There is something unsettling about his calm demeanor, as if he doesn't quite belong to this world, as if everything around him is merely a blurred backdrop. Without a word, he strides toward the flower cart. His movements are precise, almost calculated. He reaches out and picks up a single red rose, rolling its delicate petals between his fingers as though contemplating something. At last he speaks, his voice low and measured. How much? His words carry weight, as if each one has been carefully chosen before being spoken. Lily takes a second to regain her composure, then responds, her voice still trembling slightly. $30. Without hesitation, the man pulls a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, places it on the cart, and then turns away, leaving without taking the rose. Lily stares at the bill, wide-eyed. She has never encountered someone like this before. Someone who buys a flower but doesn't take it. No explanation. No reason. She quickly calls after him, "You forgot your rose." The man pauses but does not turn around. For a brief moment it seems as though he might say something. But then, in the same calm, enigmatic tone, he simply replies, "Keep it." And with that, he continues walking, stepping into his car. The door shuts firmly behind him. The Lamborghini's engine roars to life, and in an instant, it vanishes into the rain-soaked streets, leaving behind nothing but a quiet girl and a lone flower stall beneath the drizzling sky. Lily stands motionless in the middle of the street, the red rose still in her hands. Keep it? What did he mean? She glances down. The $100 bill remains untouched on the cart, cold beneath the streetlight. But then, something else catches her eye. A small black business card, nestled among the flowers. She picks it up, her heartbeat quickening. Elegant gold lettering glistens against the dark surface. Alexander Knight, CEO, Knight Corporation. Another gust of wind sweeps through the street, but this time it is not just the wind of the weather. It carries something greater, a storm of fate just beginning to unfold. What do you think about this fateful encounter? Do you believe a single moment can change an entire life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, comment "Destined Rose" to show that you believe in love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt love story. Thank you for watching. Share this story with someone you think will love it. The night had washed the city clean. The scent of damp pavement mixed with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from the street vendors. The air was crisp, and the golden glow of the morning sun painted the skyscrapers with a soft, ethereal light. Lily stood behind her flower cart, arranging the new bouquet shipment, but her mind wasn't on the roses or the daisies. Her thoughts were elsewhere. The man from last night, Alexander Knight. That name had burned itself into her memory the moment she saw it printed on that sleek black business card. Who was he? And why had he left $100 bill for a single rose, only to walk away without taking it? She told herself it was a random event, a fleeting moment of eccentricity from a wealthy man. But then, as she turned to set down a basket of lilies, she heard it. The sound of slow, measured footsteps. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end before she even turned around. And there he was. Alexander Knight, standing just a few feet from her flower cart, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy blue suit. The morning light caught the sharp angles of his face, his dark hair slightly tousled by the breeze. His blue eyes were just as unreadable as before, as if they concealed something far beyond what the world was allowed to see. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, just as before, he reached for a red rose. His fingers barely brushed the petals, but there was something deliberate in the way he touched it. Lily's grip on the counter tightened. She wasn't going to let this moment slip away this time. "You're back." Her voice was steady, but inside, 100 questions fought for dominance. Alexander glanced at her briefly, then turned his attention back to the rose. He didn't react to her words, at least not in any obvious way. "I am," he said simply. The same calm, low voice, the same deliberate way of speaking. Lily watched as he pulled out another $100 bill, placed it on the cart, and once again, turned to leave. "Number not this time. Wait." She stepped around the cart, instinctively reaching out, but she caught herself just before grabbing his sleeve. Alexander stopped, but he didn't turn around. Lily took a breath. "Why do you keep buying a flower but never taking it?" Silence stretched between them. She could feel the weight of the city moving around them, horns honking in the distance, hurried footsteps of morning commuters, the soft chatter of cafe patrons. But here, in this small space between them, time seemed to pause. Finally, Alexander turned his head just slightly, his profile visible against the morning light. And then, in a tone so calm it was almost unnerving, he said, "Because I want to. No reason needed." His answer was maddeningly vague. Lily felt something stir inside her, a frustration, a curiosity, something she couldn't quite name. She took another step forward. "I don't believe that," she said firmly. For the first time, Alexander fully turned to face her. His blue eyes, sharp and piercing, studied her intently, as if he was trying to figure something out. A breeze passed between them, carrying the faint scent of roses and rain-soaked concrete. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, Alexander gave a slight nod, more to himself than to her, and turned away once more, walking down the street without another word. Lily stood there, the red rose still in her hand, watching his retreating figure. And this time, she knew. This was no coincidence. It happened again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Every morning, at nearly the same time, Alexander Knight would appear. He would walk up to her cart, choose a rose, place $100 bill on the counter, and leave without taking the flower. And every time, Lily's frustration grew. By the 5th day, she was done playing his silent game. The moment he placed the bill down and turned to leave, she moved before she could stop herself. Stop right there. This time she did reach out, her fingers wrapping lightly around his wrist. And the moment she touched him, something shifted. Alexander froze. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken intensity. Slowly, he looked down at her hand, at the way her fingers barely circled his wrist. Lily felt the warmth of his skin against her palm, the steady pulse beneath. A strange awareness settled between them. Unexpected. Undeniable. She swallowed hard and met his gaze. "Tell me why," she said quietly. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice lower than before, almost thoughtful, he replied, "Why does it matter?" Lily tightened her grip, not in aggression, but in insistence. "Because people don't just throw money away like this, and because I don't believe you do anything without a reason." His expression remained unreadable. But something flickered in his eyes. Just for a second. Then, slowly, his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. "Perhaps, Miss Evans, you should stop trying to understand me." His fingers gently pried hers away from his wrist. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." And with that, he walked away. Lily exhaled sharply, still standing there as his figure disappeared into the crowd. Her pulse was unsteady. She didn't know why. All she knew was that Alexander Knight was no ordinary man. And whether she liked it or not, she was about to find out why. What do you think Alexander is hiding? Do you believe people do things without a reason? Or is there always something deeper beneath the surface? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you've made it this far, comment "The Red Rose Mystery" to show that you're as intrigued as Lily. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. The morning sun streamed through the narrow alleyways of New York, casting golden streaks across the sidewalks. The flower stall sat in its usual place, surrounded by neatly wrapped bouquets of roses, lilies, and tulips. It was an ordinary day, until the phone rang. Lily wiped her hands on her apron before picking up. "Hello, this is Lily's floral arrangements. How can I help you?" A smooth, professional voice responded. "Miss Evans, we're organizing a high-profile gala this evening. We need a floral arrangement that makes a statement, something elegant, sophisticated. Your name was recommended." Lily blinked in surprise. Her? Recommended for an elite event? This was far beyond the small, intimate orders she usually received. Something about it felt off. But the pay was more than fair, and she couldn't afford to say no. "I'd be honored," she said, jotting down the address. The location was an exclusive venue uptown, one of those places where only the city's elite gathered. Lily didn't belong in places like that. But work was work. That evening, she loaded the flowers carefully into the delivery van, double-checking every arrangement. The venue was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, waiters dressed in black and white, circulating with trays of champagne. The kind of event where people measured status by the brand of their watches and the weight of their last investment. She took a deep breath and pushed through the grand entrance. Then she froze, standing in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the city's most influential figures, was him. Alexander Knight. Lily's fingers tightened around the bouquet in her hands. Alexander was here. Not just here. He was the central figure. He stood with an effortless authority, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, speaking in low tones with men whose names she only recognized from magazine covers. Her heart pounded in her chest. She needed to do her job, deliver the flowers, leave quickly. No one would even notice her. Or so she thought. A shrill voice sliced through the room. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Lily turned and found herself face to face with a woman in a shimmering silver gown, dripping in diamonds. It was the kind of woman whose perfume was expensive, and whose smile was anything but warm. The woman looked Lily up and down, and a smirk curled on her lips. A flower girl at a place like this? Did someone order budget decorations? A few guests chuckled softly, their whispers carrying across the ballroom. Lily's face burned. She had no response, no clever retort, no way to defend herself in a world where she clearly did not belong. Then, before she could move, a voice cut through the air. Deep, calm, and absolute. "She belongs here more than anyone else in this room." The crowd fell silent. Lily turned. So did everyone else. Alexander stood just a few feet away. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone was enough to shift the energy of the room. He stepped forward, his gaze steady on the woman in silver. "You judge her because she works with her hands? Because she builds something beautiful instead of tearing people down?" The woman's face paled slightly, but she forced a laugh. "Oh, Alexander, it's just a joke." "No," he interrupted smoothly. "It wasn't." Lily swallowed hard. She had never had someone stand up for her like that before. The weight of the stairs around her was suffocating. But somehow, knowing that Alexander was there, unshaken, unwavering, made it bearable. The woman in silver quickly retreated, her laughter hollow. Alexander turned to Lily, his gaze softer now. "Are you all right?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "I should finish setting up." He didn't stop her, but as she moved, she felt his presence lingering nearby, watching, not in judgment, but as if he had no intention of letting her disappear just yet. The event carried on. Lily worked in the background, placing arrangements on tables, adjusting floral centerpieces. But her mind wasn't on the flowers. It was on him. Why had Alexander defended her? Why did he always appear in her life at the most unexpected moments? And why did it feel like he knew something she didn't? As she finished setting up, she turned and found him standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching her. Their eyes met, and this time, she didn't look away. Something had changed tonight, and whatever it was, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. What would you do if someone stood up for you like that? Have you ever had a moment where you felt completely out of place until someone made you feel seen? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you've made it this far, comment "The Flower and the CEO" to show that you're as invested in this story as we are. And don't forget, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is about to change everything. New York never stops moving. Even in the early morning, the streets pulse with energy. Horns blaring, tires screeching against the pavement, people rushing past each other, each lost in their own world. For Lily, the city had become a blur. She had been working non-stop for days, taking on extra orders, barely eating, barely sleeping. The gala had been a success, but with new opportunities came overwhelming demand. And she had no one to share the burden with. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted a heavy box of fresh roses onto the cart. The world around her tilted for a brief second, but she shook it off. Just a little more. Just a few more deliveries. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the streets as Lily made her way toward the next destination. Her legs ached, her head throbbed. She hadn't eaten since morning, but the weight of responsibility kept her going. Then, suddenly, the noise of the city dulled. The lights blurred, her vision swam, and before she could even process what was happening, everything went dark. Scene 2. The moment he couldn't ignore. The first thing Lily registered when she woke up was the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. Then, the softness of the sheets beneath her fingertips. The sterile scent of disinfectant. She blinked, her vision adjusting to the dim hospital light. A figure sat near her bedside. Dark suit, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a watch that gleamed under the soft glow. Alexander. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the floor, his elbow resting on his knee, fingers laced together as if deep in thought. His presence felt wrong. Not because he didn't belong here, but because he did. A man like him shouldn't be sitting in a hospital room overnight. And yet, here he was. Lily swallowed, her throat dry. Why are you here? At the sound of her voice, Alexander looked up. For a moment, he said nothing. His blue eyes, usually unreadable, always so composed, held something different. Something she couldn't quite place. He studied her, as if weighing his words. Then, quietly, he said, I don't know. His voice was lower than usual, almost hesitant. And that was what made Lily's breath catch. Because Alexander Knight was never hesitant. She watched as he leaned back slightly, exhaling as if frustrated with himself. His fingers ran through his dark hair, messing up the perfectly styled strands. I was nearby, he muttered, but it sounded like a lie. Lily's lips parted, but she didn't know what to say. She had known him for weeks now, had exchanged words with him, had watched him appear and disappear like a ghost in her life. And now, for the first time, he wasn't untouchable. For the first time, he didn't look like a man who had everything under control. You stayed here? She whispered. Alexander glanced at the clock. All night, Lily's chest tightened. This made no sense. You didn't have to do that, she murmured. A muscle in Alexander's jaw twitched. He stood up, shoving his hands into his pockets, turning his gaze toward the window as if looking for something. An answer, maybe. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I didn't have to. I wanted to. Something inside Lily shifted. She didn't know what to say to that. Neither did Alexander. For the first time, both of them were standing in a moment neither of them could explain. And neither of them dared to move. The following days were different. Lily returned to work, but something about her routine felt altered. Because now, every time she glanced toward the corner of the street, she half expected to see him there. And more often than not, he was. Alexander started appearing more frequently, though never with an explanation. Sometimes he would be leaning against the side of his car, scrolling through his phone as if he just happened to be nearby. Other times, he would walk past her stall, pausing only long enough to meet her gaze before moving on. And then, there were the moments when he simply stood there, watching. Not in an overbearing way, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her wonder if he was trying to figure something out about himself. One evening, after finishing a long day of work, Lily turned to lock up the stall, only to find Alexander standing across the street. His tie was loosened, his hands in his pockets. She exhaled, shaking her head. Are you just going to keep showing up like this? He didn't answer right away. Then, in that familiar, low, steady voice, he asked, Do you want me to stop? Lily's breath caught, because for the first time, she didn't know how to answer that. And from the way Alexander's lips curved just slightly, as if he had been waiting for her hesitation, she knew that he knew it too. If you've made it this far, comment "a change in the air" to show that you're just as drawn into this story as we are. And don't forget, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is about to unravel everything you thought you knew about Alexander Knight. The night wrapped around New York like a heavy shroud, the streetlights flickering against the wet pavement. The city was alive, but in this particular moment, in this particular place, there was only silence. Lily had just finished stacking the last bouquet in her flower cart when she noticed him. Alexander. He stood beneath the awning of a high-end cafe, his broad shoulders framed by the city lights, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his tailored coat. But he wasn't alone. A man, tall, sharp-featured, and dressed with the same polished precision, stood beside him. They were speaking in low voices, their words lost in the hum of the street. Lily turned away. It wasn't her business. But then, Alexander's voice cut through the air, rougher than she had ever heard it. "I can't do it, Henry." Lily's hand froze over the flowers. She wasn't the type to eavesdrop. But something about his tone, strained, almost vulnerable, made her stop. Henry, the other man, sighed. "You say that every year, Alexander, but you still buy the flowers." A beat of silence. Then Alexander's voice again, lower this time, weighted with something deep, something unseen. "Because I have to." Lily's breath caught. "Flowers," her fingers tightened around the fabric of her coat. Henry hesitated before responding. "Then take them." Alexander let out a short, bitter laugh. "And do what? Leave them on her grave and pretend it changes anything?" Lily's chest tightened. A grave. Now, it all made sense. The way he always bought flowers but never took them. The way he carried himself. Detached, controlled, but with a lingering tension that never quite left him. This wasn't about habit. This was about regret. Lily didn't know how long she stood there, unmoving, her heart pounding against her ribs. But when she finally looked up again, Henry was gone. Alexander remained, standing by his car, his head bowed, one hand gripping the edge of the door as if steadying himself. For the first time since she had met him, he looked lost. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Alexander." His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn. "How much did you hear?" Lily swallowed hard. "Enough." Slowly, he turned toward her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in the dim glow of the streetlights, she saw it. Just for a flicker of a second. The weight of something unbearable behind his eyes. Lily had always thought of Alexander as untouchable. A man who moved through life with precise control, who never let emotions cloud his decisions. But now, she saw the truth. He wasn't indifferent. He was haunted, and for reasons she couldn't explain, that realization made her chest ache. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Lily should have walked away, should have let him have his moment. But something about the way he stood there, alone in the dark, made her stay. "You regret something," she said softly. Alexander exhaled, his breath visible in the cool night air. Regret is useless. But Lily caught the flicker of his fingers, a barely there movement, like he wanted to clench his fist but stopped himself. "Who was she?" she asked. His gaze flicked to her. For a second, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My mother." The words were quiet. Almost too quiet. Lily's lips parted, but no sound came. Alexander turned away, looking past her, past the street, past the city itself. "I was supposed to visit her that day," he murmured. "But I didn't. We argued. She wanted me to come home. I told her I didn't have time. And then—" He stopped. Lily felt her heart drop. She didn't need him to finish the sentence. She already knew how it ended. A cold gust of wind rushed through the street, but Lily barely felt it. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into the pocket of her coat. She pulled out a single red rose. It wasn't perfect. Its petals were slightly bruised from the chill, but she held it out to him anyway. "Take it." Alexander's gaze dropped to the flower. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he reached out. His fingers brushed against hers as he took the rose. And Lily swore, in that instant, something in his expression cracked, just for a moment. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back in place. Alexander turned, sliding into his car without another word. The engine roared to life. And as Lily watched him drive away, a single thought pulsed through her mind. He isn't as unreachable as he pretends to be. What do you think will happen next? Will Alexander finally let go of his guilt? Should Lily help him? Or will she only get hurt in the process? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. If you've made it this far, comment "A Rose for the Past" to show that you're following every moment of this journey. The sky over Manhattan was heavy with storm clouds. The scent of rain clung to the air, thick and electric. Lily Evans stood outside her small flower shop, the neon "closed" sign flickering behind her as she pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. It had been a long day, longer than most, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The streets were quieter than usual, the usual hum of the city muffled by the coming storm. She reached into her pocket for the shop keys, but just as she was about to turn the lock, a voice, low, smooth, but unmistakably dangerous. "Leaving already, sweetheart?" Lily froze. She turned slowly. 3 men stood at the entrance of the alley next to her shop, their shadows stretching across the pavement beneath the dim streetlights. Her stomach tightened. The leader, a man in a worn leather jacket, took a step forward, a smirk curling at the corner of his lips. "That's a shame. We were just looking for a little company." His 2 companions chuckled, stepping closer, blocking her exit. Lily's fingers clenched around the keys. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I have nothing you want." The man tilted his head, eyes gleaming. "That's where you're wrong." The first man reached for her wrist, and then a blur of movement. Fast, precise, deadly. Before Lily could react, a dark figure stepped out of the shadows behind them. A sharp sound, a grunt, a body hitting pavement. The leader staggered back, clutching his ribs, eyes wide with shock. Alexander Knight. He moved with terrifying efficiency, dispatching the second man with a swift strike to the jaw before turning to the third, his voice quiet but laced with lethal intent. "Run." The man hesitated for half a second before bolting down the alley, disappearing into the night. The leader, still clutching his ribs, spat blood onto the pavement before stumbling after him. Silence settled. The rain began to fall. Lily stood frozen, her breath coming in short, shaky bursts. Alexander turned to her, his black coat soaked through, his hair falling messily over his forehead, his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, but the adrenaline still rushed through her veins. "You always show up when I need you," she whispered. He exhaled, his jaw tightening. Then, quieter this time, "Because I can't let you disappear from my life." Lily's heart pounded. His hand reached up, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. The city blurred around them. And then, he kissed her. The rain poured down, cold against her skin, but his lips were warm, firm, as if he'd been holding back for too long. Lily clung to him, letting the moment swallow them whole, For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Neither did he. The morning paper arrived early. Alexander barely glanced at it as his assistant, Henry, set it down on his desk. But then he saw the headline: CEO Alexander Knight and his forbidden romance with a flower girl. A photo accompanied the article, a grainy, rain-soaked image of him and Lily, their bodies too close, their lips inches apart. Alexander's jaw locked. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway before his father's voice followed. "Tell me this is a joke." Richard Knight strode into the office, the weight of his presence alone enough to fill the room. Alexander folded the paper and leaned back in his chair. "It's not." His father exhaled sharply. "You have responsibilities. This reckless infatuation is beneath you." Alexander remained still. His father's voice lowered, colder now. "She will never be accepted in our world." Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "Then maybe I don't want your world." Silence. His mother, standing quietly in the doorway, finally spoke. "Do you really believe this is worth everything you'll lose?" Alexander didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. Lily had seen the headlines before she even stepped outside. It wasn't just the newspapers. It was everywhere, online, on TV. People whispered as she passed, their eyes lingering a second too long. She knew what this meant. Alexander's world wasn't built for someone like her. And now, because of her, he was being scrutinized, torn apart. Lily sat at her kitchen table, staring at the small suitcase beside her. One choice, one decision. She picked up a pen. She wrote a single note, then she left. Alexander arrived at her apartment that evening. The door was unlocked. Something inside him twisted. The space was empty. Her clothes, gone. Her suitcase, gone. His chest tightened as his gaze landed on the small wooden table by the window. A single red rose sat in the center. And beside it, a note. He picked it up, fingers tightening around the paper. "You've bought so many flowers, Alexander. But have you ever truly kept one?" Alexander closed his eyes. The realization hit him all at once. She was gone. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix it. The morning air was sharp, crisp with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The cemetery stretched out before him, rows of stone markers standing silently under the weight of time. A cold wind whispered through the trees, stirring the last remnants of autumn. Alexander Knight stood motionless, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his dark coat. His breath curled in the cold air, dissipating into nothingness, just like the words he never said. Before him, a gravestone. His mother's name was carved into the polished marble, the gold lettering slightly faded but still unmistakable. And in his hand, a single red rose, the same kind he had bought every year, but this time he wasn't walking away. This time, he knelt. His fingers traced the letters of her name, slow and deliberate, as if the stone might somehow give him back the time he had lost. "I should have said I was sorry." The words felt foreign leaving his lips, raw and unpracticed. "I should have told you I loved you before it was too late." Silence. No forgiveness, no warmth, just the bitter bite of regret. The wind howled softly through the branches, stirring his coat, but he remained still. Then, a sharp exhale. He stood, setting the rose carefully at the base of the grave. There was no more time to waste, because this time, he wasn't going to lose someone he loved. The train station pulsed with life. Loudspeakers crackled with departure announcements. Hurried footsteps echoed against the marble floors, and the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the crisp morning air. Lily stood near the platform, her grip tightening around the handle of her suitcase. She had convinced herself that leaving was the right decision, that it was the only decision. But then, why did it feel like she was about to tear herself apart? The train to Boston will be departing in 5 minutes. The announcement sliced through the air like a final verdict. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her ticket, her heart pounding. Then, a commotion. Footsteps. Fast. Urgent. Someone was running. Her chest tightened, but she didn't turn. She couldn't. Not yet. Then, arms wrapped around her from behind, holding her tightly, desperately, like he would never let go, a sharp breath caught in her throat. "Lily!" His voice was raw, almost broken. Slowly she turned. And there he was, Alexander Knight, out of breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His dark hair was damp, strands sticking to his forehead as if he had run through the entire city just to get here. His eyes, desperate, wild, terrified. Rain still clung to the shoulders of his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. All he saw was her. All he cared about was her. "I'm done buying flowers," he whispered, his voice hoarse. His hands found hers, holding them like a lifeline. "I want to keep this one." Lily's breath hitched, her eyes stinging. "Alexander." His grip tightened. "I don't care what the world thinks. I don't care about my reputation, about headlines, about anything except you." A pause. A sharp inhale. "If you go, he exhaled, shaking his head, as if the words were too painful to finish. "I can't lose you." Tears burned at the edges of her vision. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She had promised herself she would make this clean. But nothing about love was clean. Her fingers trembled as she reached up, brushing against the rough stubble on his jaw. And she whispered the only thing that mattered. "If you keep that promise, I'll stay." His breath hitched, and then, before she could change her mind, before she could doubt, he kissed her, right there, in the middle of the platform, as people rushed around them, as the world continued moving. But for them, time stopped. A week later, morning sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of Lily's flower shop, casting a golden glow on the wooden floors. The scent of roses, lilies, and fresh earth filled the space. At the counter, sleeves rolled up, Alexander stood with an expression of intense concentration, attempting and failing to arrange a bouquet. Lily leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching with a smirk. "You know, you're terrible at this." He glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "I'm improving." She snorted. "You're a billionaire, Alexander. You could buy the entire flower industry." He chuckled, picking up a single red rose. He turned, stepping toward her. And then, he placed the flower in her hand. "I don't need the whole industry." His fingers brushed hers. "I just need this one." Lily met his gaze, and for the first time, she believed him. Because Alexander Knight wasn't just buying another flower, he was keeping this one. Forever. The morning sun spilled golden light over the streets of New York, painting everything in soft, warm hues. The crisp scent of fresh flowers mixed with the city's familiar rhythm. Horns honking, footsteps echoing against pavement, the distant hum of conversations. Nestled between two brick buildings, a charming flower shop stood, its large glass windows adorned with cascading vines and delicate fairy lights. Lily's flowers. A dream she had once thought impossible, now a reality. Inside, sunlight danced over wooden shelves lined with roses, peonies, and lilies, filling the space with the soft fragrance of nature. And there, behind the counter, stood Lily. She had changed. Gone was the girl who hesitated, who doubted. In her place was a woman who had learned that love, real love, was not about being saved. It was about being seen, and every day, without fail. Alexander Knight walked through that door, but unlike before, he never left empty-handed, because now He always kept the flower. The sky burned with the colors of twilight, deep purples melting into fiery orange, the last golden light stretching across an endless field of roses. Lily stood at the center of it all, surrounded by a sea of crimson petals swaying in the gentle evening breeze. The world smelled of roses, of earth, of something achingly familiar. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured. She turned, and there he was, Alexander Knight, dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the wind tousling his dark hair, but his eyes, the way they held her, unchanged, still steady, still certain, still hers. In his hand, a single red rose. But tonight, he wasn't just giving her a flower. Tonight, he was giving her forever. He dropped to one knee, the soft rustling of the grass the only sound in the still evening air. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, his voice, low and steady, carrying more weight than any words had before. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Lily's breath caught. "And I don't want to just buy flowers anymore." A pause. "I want to keep this one." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Slowly, he opened it. A diamond glowed under the fading sunlight, but her gaze never left his. Lily Evans. A breath. A heartbeat. "Will you marry me?" Her vision blurred, not from doubt, not from fear, but because, for the first time in her life, she knew. She knew she was home. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she let out a breathless laugh, nodding before her voice even returned to her. Yes. A whisper. A promise. And as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, pressing his lips against her knuckles, the world seemed to hold its breath. Because in that moment, love had won, and it would never let go. Do you believe a single moment can change a life forever? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've watched this far, comment "Destined Rose" to show you believe in love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more heartwarming love stories. Thank you for watching. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in love again.